Well, what can I say, folks? Just about a week ago, I was ranting about how I couldn't get my hands on the Zephyrus G14 due to availability, and now I'm here with one in front of me. And guys, you can actually buy this right now, even here in Canada, and I'll actually make sure to leave links in the description down below if you want to pick one up. So the story with the G14 is actually really interesting. It was first introduced last year with AMD's Ryzen 9 4900HS CPU and an RTX 2060 Max-Q graphics card in a 14-inch form factor. And that just broke the internet. I mean, everyone was just so impressed with what it was able to offer for less than $1,500. And I also have to mention that it was really hard to find one, and of course the pandemic happened, things just wasn't really in a good state. Also, this laptop sort of set the bar as to what we can expect for every AMD-based gaming laptop moving forward. Now this year, they've made a few tweaks under the hood, so what we're going to do is compare it to what's already out there in 2021, notably the Razer Blade 14 that was just recently announced. So let's get right into it, but first, a quick word from our sponsor.
XTRFY MZ1 Size Weight, a unique project and a very unique mouse designed by Rocket Jump Ninja for better aim. After testing more than 250 mice, Zai knew what a mouse needed for maximum aim potential, but the shape did not exist, so he teamed up with XTRFY, shaped his own mouse, and loaded it with top-tier components. That means Pixar 3389 sensor, KLGM 8.0 switches, and the new EasyCord Pro on the lightest XTRFY mouse yet. A killer in the right hands? Try it out for yourself on xtrfy.com.
All right, so let's start with pricing and specs. The base model starts at tad below $1,200, and that'll get you a Ryzen 7 5800HS CPU with 8 cores and 16 threads, 16 gigabytes of RAM, half a terabyte of storage, and a GTX 1650, and a Quad HD 120Hz display. The next tier costs around $1,350, which bumps up the CPU to a Ryzen 9 5900HS, twice the storage size, and an RTX 3060, and a full HD 144Hz display. The sample that we have over here comes with 32 gigabytes of RAM and a fancy anime matrix display that costs around $2,000. By the way, this is a sample that we have over here. Now, finding those SKUs, especially for those prices, can be a bit challenging. You might find some for a few $100s more or a few $100s less. I actually found a 3060 sample for around $1,500, which is a pretty good sweet spot. And if I were to compare that to the 3060 sample of the Blade 14, it's significantly cheaper. We're talking roughly $250 to a $350 difference, which is huge. So what exactly are you getting for that price difference? Well, for starters, the exterior design remains exactly the same compared to last year. ASUS is still using the same chassis that's made out of magnesium alloy that's put together pretty well. I didn't notice any creaking with my sample when handling, so the build quality is pretty good. I wouldn't say it competes with the Blade 14 because this laptop is made entirely of CNC milled aluminum unibody chassis, so you can exactly feel that premium sort of craftsmanship when you hold this thing. The hinge on the G14 is actually not that stiff. It does wobble a little bit, and that is due to it supporting itself on the surface, but at the same time it elevates the keyboard at an angle to help with your typing experience. This moonlight white finish is pretty unique, but it's not consistent throughout the chassis. It's just a mashup of white and silver, which honestly doesn't look that great. Personally, I would pick the gray finish as it looks more consistent, but finding one with these specs also is pretty challenging, so that is also kind of weird. The anime matrix display on the lid is actually pretty unique. Essentially, it's a combination of 1,000 mili LEDs that can allow you to display any sort of graphics that you might be interested in. So you can import images or cycle through a handful of presets that ASUS has. One of my favorites is the battery indicator, and you can actually have that enabled full time even with the lid closed. But keep in mind that's going to consume a lot more battery. It's a great conversation starter if you're at a coffee shop, which, speaking of which, if you do have that setting, everybody's going to know how much battery you have on your laptop, which can also be a little bit weird. This is a very lightweight device, coming in at around 3.75 pounds or 1.7 kilos, which is lighter than the Blade 14. However, I have to mention that the Z height on this laptop is a bit chunky, coming in at 0.78 inches versus 0.66 on the Blade. Honestly, it's not a big deal because even with this form factor, you can easily fit this thing inside a backpack or a messenger bag, and it's not going to take up too much space on your desk. The power adapter is also very compact and easier to handle, which is another bonus. The keyboard layout hasn't changed all that much. You still get dedicated keys to control the volume and access Armory Crate. The keys are excellent with the right amount of travel distance and good feedback when you bottom out. Honestly, this is miles better than what you'll find on the Blade 14 because the keyboard on this is just not my personal favorite. Sadly, you don't get RGB lighting on the G14. It's backlit in white and it's pretty bright for your night sessions. The trackpad is smooth. It's actually a lot smaller than the Blade 14, which did get a while to get used to. Personally, I do prefer the size on the Blade 14 because I do have big hands. But that being said, this gets the job done. It's super smooth and the primary left and right click buttons are nice and satisfying. I have nothing to complain here. I'm actually really glad that ASUS didn't cheap out in this area, especially compared to some of their own offerings like the Tough and the Strix series. The port setup has been carried over from last year's model over to this year. So on the left-hand side, you get power in, HDMI 2.0, USB 3.2 Gen 2 with DisplayPort pass-through, and power delivery, along with an audio jack. Switching over to the right-hand side, you get a Kensington lock, a couple of USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, and another USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 2 port. Now, I was hoping for ASUS to implement a webcam on this year's model, but unfortunately, you don't get that once again. But they do have a microphone built in, at least. I mean, thank God. So it does have ASUS's signature AI noise canceling characteristics, and this is what it sounds like. I also noticed that, interestingly, with their Zephyrus lineup, ASUS only offers webcams on their Intel models, whereas on AMD, I can't seem to find any with a webcam. So I'm not sure if they're just reserving pretty much everything for Intel specs instead of AMD. So yeah, I think that that's kind of odd. But let me know what you guys think about the microphone quality on the G14. The speakers are great on this laptop. You get two tiny tweeters at the top and then a couple of woofers at the bottom beneath. And the end result is basically a combination of high fidelity in the trebles and then good depth in the bass response. So I didn't have any issues, watching videos and of course, performing some casual gaming here and there as well. So yeah, nothing to complain there. Switching gears to the display, ASUS has added another option this time on top of their 1080p 144Hz IPS level screen. And that's Quad HD at 120 Hz with a better color gamut. As you can see, it covers 100% sRGB, 87% Adobe RGB, and 98% DCI-P3, which is a huge improvement compared to last year's model. So if your workflow requires a screen that's good with colors and contrast, then this will get the job done. It's also a great panel for gaming as well, but I will be honest, having used 240 Hz and faster displays on laptops, this does feel like a step back. And I also don't know exactly what's the point with having Quad HD in a 14-inch form factor. I mean, scaling it at 100% is just completely out of question because you'll need magnifying glasses to just, identify things. My comfort zone was 125%, and I also wished if they went with a 16:10 display this time because, they're not giving us a webcam, so might as well just give us or use that extra space to extend the screen. Upgradability is pretty flexible on the G14 considering its size. You have instant access to a single SODIMM slot that's already populated on my sample. 16 gigabytes is on board, so the max you can go with is 32 gigabytes, which is a nice bump up from 24 gigabytes last year. The primary NVMe SSD is right over here, and once again, the drive speeds are a substantial improvement over last year's model. We're getting almost double the performance in both read and write speeds, which is just awesome. I think this is an area where the G14 takes an edge over the Blade 14 because on this laptop, the only thing that's user upgradable is the SSD. And that is a bummer. Now, another impressive aspect on the G14 is its bigger battery. And to test battery life, we use the built-in silent mode since ASUS actually doesn't have a balanced setting on the G14. One thing I want to mention right away is what's being highlighted. Of course, there's the G14, but I wanted to emphasize the Blade 14 since it's the only other 14-inch laptop in these charts. And right away, the new G14 has some really tough competition, but with a combination of an efficient HS class CPU and a pretty big 76 watt-hour battery, it does end up topping the charts. While it may be a bit larger overall than the Blade 14, the additional capacity means a lot, guys, and this is a huge deal for anyone who wants a gaming laptop that's also adaptable for travel, work, or school. That lower wattage Ryzen 9 5900HS and its larger battery also pushes the G14 just a bit ahead of the Blade 14 here. And of course, nothing touches the Zephyrus G15 with its massive 90 watt-hours, but when it comes to getting the most out of a gaming laptop, the G14 is still one of the best. Now, just like every other ASUS laptop that we've seen in a while, there are 3 performance settings that you can cycle between. So there is silent, performance, and then turbo, or the other option is to just let Windows power plants take care of everything. Even in performance mode, the G14 is really well behaved, but I guess that's what we've come to expect from laptops with HS series CPUs and lower wattage graphics cards. Turbo does get a bit noisy, but that's because ASUS runs it at full fan speed and it's not something that you'd want to use for extended periods of time. Either way, these numbers are right in line with what I saw on the Blade 14, so that's good news. Exterior temperatures are pretty good too, since the cooling system keeps the palm rest areas and part of the keyboard at just above ambient temperatures. Looking a bit further, there's a hotspot right in the middle, which can be a bit uncomfortable at times, but luckily the WASD areas stay cool to the touch. I also like the fact that all of the hot air is directed out the back. Sure, it means 2 areas of the screen gets roasting hot, but at least it's not blasting at your mouse hand. The bottom doesn't really show anything too worrying, but I really wouldn't want to game with this thing on my lap. You might also remember that one of the Blade 14's biggest advantages was that it used a Ryzen 9 5900HX and it also ran at an impressive 77 watts at 3.7 GHz in high mode. Now keep those numbers in the back of your head, since this version of the Zephyrus G14 uses a lower voltage 5900HS. Let's start right at the top with power, and I've got to say, it's sort of all over the place. For short workloads, Turbo running with its max fan speeds starts at a respectable 65 watts, but then it takes a massive dip to 56 watts before finally settling right around the 60 watt mark. Performance mode does the same thing. It hits 65 watts for a little while, then it dives to 51 watts and then heads up to 56 watts. But there's also another reduction to just 45 watts where it stays for the rest of the test. Silent should be nothing new to anyone who's already seen one of our other reviews of ASUS laptops. It cuts back power big time, which is also why the G14 stays so quiet in that mode. Now, when it comes to clock speeds, things get even more interesting with them taking a bit of a dive as power gets decreased. But Turbo eventually maintained 3.85 GHz, while performance first wants to settle at 3.7 GHz, but add a few more minutes and we're looking at 3.5. But this is also the strength of the HS series CPUs. The G14 just needed 56 watts to reach just above 3.7 GHz, while the Blade 14's 5900HX needed 77 watts. As for temperatures, remember, the G14's cooling system hadn't really been updated, and that sort of shows with both performance and turbo reaching over 90 degrees. Silent is a lot better, but you're also getting a big cut in frequencies for those numbers. And that all leads to the G14 actually beating the Blade 14 in Cinebench R20, since it can capitalize on those higher clock speeds in shorter tests. I should also mention these are being done in performance mode, just like all other laptops. But the Blade's 5900HX does move a bit out of front in single core run, which could technically lead to better gaming results. Either way, the G14 puts up some amazing results when you compare its size to a lot of the other bigger and thicker 15-inch laptops here. It even manages to beat its closest competitor, the Blade 14 everyone's been talking about. There isn't a massive gap between the two, but it is there, and that might be a bit worrying for Razer considering their Blade does cost a lot more. But move on to some programs like Premiere, where there's more emphasis on the GPU, and I really thought the Blade's RTX 3070 would give an advantage here, but it actually didn't. Either the G14 was out front by a bit, or at least tied with the Blade. Guys, I've got to say, when it comes to productivity, seeing these results just confirms that you can't really judge laptops by their specs alone. There's just so much going behind the scenes that affects performance. And after seeing these results, I actually was wondering if ASUS might be pumping a bit more power into the GPU. But no, not at all. This is actually one of the lowest wattage RTX 3060 I've seen so far, capping out at an average of just 76 watts in turbo and 70 watts in performance. And the silent setting certainly isn't something you'd want to game on unless you're into less demanding titles, since its power level is so low. And that all leads to frequencies that can't keep up with some of the other larger laptops that we've tested, but they're still pretty respectable, and turbo and performance sticks right between NVIDIA's clock speeds of 1283 to 1703 MHz. The only exception is silent, which is way under that at around 1050 MHz, but it's still good to see every one of these completely stable, which is of course a lot better than what I saw on the CPU. Temperatures on this laptop are pretty good, and you can actually see right here where the fans turn itself to higher RPM levels as it tries to keep up. But as time goes on, heat continually increases, at least in performance mode, while the other two modes are a lot better managed. It hits 78 by the end of the test, which isn't that bad, but where does it end? Let's expand that graph a bit. It looks like performance finally reaches a steady temperature around the 13-second mark, where it peaks at 80 degrees, and it stays there regardless of how much additional time you game. Those extra few degrees don't change frequencies by any measurable amount either, so it looks like ASUS pegged their GPU clock speeds to run exactly parallel with a peak of 80 degrees. So don't worry about extended gaming sessions destroying performance. Now, as we go through the 1080p gaming results, you're going to see a bit of a trend. The average of between 70 and 72 watts in the performance setting ends up pushing the RTX 3060 on this laptop to the back of the charts. The only laptop it consistently beats is actually the Triton, which is about the same price as the G14 in its mid-tier configuration. In comparison to the Blade 14, well, Razer's laptop is a better gaming machine by a long shot. It isn't even close, but neither are the prices. I mean, sure, both are 14-inch gaming laptops, but the machines we've tested have very, very different specs and price points. The same goes for performance at 1440p. If you're dead set on buying a gaming-focused laptop in a 14-inch form factor, the G14 still offers really good value. But there are plenty of slightly larger 15-inch devices out there that'll cost about the same or less while offering better performance. I mean, don't get me wrong, the G14 doesn't have any trouble gaming at 1440p, but there are better options if you want a laptop that focuses purely on gaming. And I guess that really sums up what you're paying for with the G14 and even the Blade 14. And that's convenience. These laptops cram a ton of performance into a compact and really portable form factor, and there is a premium to pay for that. And speaking of premiums, if you want the best bang for the buck, I would avoid the model that I have over here, unless if you're hell-bent on getting a 1440p display and of course other fancy features like the anime matrix display, because those things really don't add to the performance on this laptop. In fact, for $2,000, you can actually get one hell of a 15-inch gaming laptop these days. My personal sweet spot or my personal pick would be the mid-tier spec, which is around $1,500, and the performance between that and the 2K version is most likely going to be the same. But other than that, this is basically the same laptop just like last year, guys. It rocks the same I/O layout, keyboard, trackpad. You still don't get a webcam. It's built really well, but I think ASUS needs to watch out because the Zephyrus G14 lineup used to be unique, but now there are a ton of other Ryzen-based 14-inch competitors around the corner, and something like the Blade 14, it's already available. They definitely need to step it up in terms of design and offering a unique sort of feature set with the next generation. So ASUS, if you're watching this, take notes. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. I'm just glad I was able to finally get my hands on the G14. You guys have seen the results. Let us know what you guys think about it in the comments. I'm Ibor with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys in the next one. Spend responsibly, my friends.